In exactly 27 crackling seconds, the air inside a live town hall snapped like a live wire ready to explode. J.D. Vance slammed his fist, eyes burning, and spat at Jasmine Crockett. "Sit down, you're unfit." Gasps ricocheted off the walls, cameras lunged forward, and the nation's pulse stopped cold. What could one woman possibly unleash in that silence that made America rise as one? The red-on-air light burned like a flare above the stage. This wasn't another polite policy talk. It was a live collision of America's deepest tensions, beamed into millions of homes under the headline, "The Future of American Democracy." The applause was there, but thin, like a cover over a storm. Jasmine Crockett entered from stage, left her midnight blue blazer catching the light. Her steps were calm, precise, as if rehearsed 1,000 times, yet heavy with meaning. She wasn't walking for herself, she was walking for the mothers, juggling 2 jobs for veterans, forgotten by the system for factory workers, whose hands still bore grease from a 12-hour shift. Jasmine took her seat. She wasn't chasing applause, only offering respect. And in that quiet strength, the room leaned toward her before she even spoke. Across from her, J.D. Vance sat already poised like a prosecutor, ready to tear down a witness. His lips curled in a smirk, eyes glinting with a mix of confidence and disdain. The cameras caught it instantly, that expression of a man certain of his superiority, certain that this night would end with her humiliated. He adjusted his tie, leaning back in his chair, as if the seat itself belonged to him more than the debate did. Every movement dripped with condescension. Without saying a word, he was already painting Jasmine as unfit in the eyes of those watching. And the longer the silence stretched, the more his smirk deepened. The camera cut away to the audience, ordinary Americans who had lived the costs of broken promises. A veteran in uniform sat upright, his medals catching the light, his eyes fixed on the stage as though measuring courage. Beside him, a single mother clutched her purse, her lips pressed tight, her child's shoes worn, but carefully cleaned for this night. Rows further back, a group of factory workers in dusty boots leaned forward, shoulders hunched, their faces lit by both hope and suspicion. The moderator shuffled his notes, his fingers trembling, just enough to betray nerves. He cleared his throat, but the sound barely carried, swallowed by the thick silence in the hall. Even the camera operators seemed to move slower, like predators circling prey, waiting for the first strike. Every second felt heavier than the last. The applause had died too quickly, leaving an airless tension in its wake. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged alive, a silence that hummed like a live wire just before it snaps. Somewhere inside it, a moment was coiled, ready to strike. And when it came, the whole country would hear it. Jasmine had just found her rhythm. Her voice steady, her words sharp. She spoke about civil rights, as if every sentence was a promise carved in stone. The audience leaned in, sensing this was more than politics. It was a heartbeat on stage. And then it happened. J.D. Vance slammed his hand against the table, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Sit down, you're unfit." The sound cracked across the hall, brutal and dismissive, a command meant to crush. Gasps ricocheted from wall to wall. The veteran's jaw clenched, the single mother's eyes widened. The factory workers shifted forward in their seats. The camera swung instantly to Jasmine's face, searching for a reaction, hungry for the crack. But she didn't flinch. Her lips pressed together, her eyes steady, her body still, calm yet cutting. The silence wrapped around her like armor, while JD's words still echoed like smoke in the room. The moderator froze, gripping his papers like a shield. The producers in the back nearly jumped from their chairs, knowing this was the clip that would travel the nation before dawn. Even the lights seemed hotter, harsher, as if the stage itself was demanding a response. JD smirked again, thinking he had broken her. His eyes scanned the crowd as if to say, "See, she has no answer." But the quiet stretched longer than anyone expected. Each second dragged heavy and sharp, pulling the audience into suspense. The veteran leaned forward, eyes locked on Jasmine. The single mother whispered something under her breath. A hush fell deeper than before, a silence so thick it felt alive. It wasn't weakness. It was control. Jasmine finally lifted her head, not rushed, not panicked, just slow enough to make every camera follow her. Her silence became the loudest thing in the room. JD's smile faltered just slightly. His confidence cracked at the edges as Jasmine stared directly at him, unblinking. For a moment, the room felt split in two, his arrogance on one side, her unshakable resolve on the other. The tension was unbearable. The audience knew she had to say something, do something, but she didn't rush. She let the insult hang there, let the weight of it sink into every ear and every heart. And when she finally opened her mouth, the country would hold its breath. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. JD leaned back, satisfied his smirk, daring her to speak. The cameras closed in every lens, hunting for the moment she would break. But Jasmine didn't look at him. She stepped forward slow, deliberate, her heels striking the floor like drum beats. Her eyes swept the crowd, not once glancing at the man who had tried to erase her. Her voice came low, but clear, carrying like a bell through the hall. "I don't ask him," she said, each word sharp, deliberate. "I ask you. Should I sit down?" The room froze. Time seemed to stop, every breath caught in chest, every heart waiting. For a moment, no one dared move, as if the weight of history pressed down on their shoulders. Then a sound cut through the silence. One voice, rough, cracked, but strong. The veteran in the front row pushed himself up with his cane and shouted, "Stand up, Jasmine." It was like a spark dropped in dry grass. The single mother shot to her feet, clapping through tears. The factory workers rose as one fist pumping in the air. The chant began to roll through the hall, a wave no one could stop. "Stand up, Jasmine! Stand up, Jasmine!" The cameras swung wide, capturing the eruption. Faces lit with fire. Strangers linking voices, the entire room rising to its feet in defiance. The chant shook, the stage rattled. The lights thundered into living rooms across America. JD lunged toward his mic, shouting to regain control, but his voice vanished, drowned in the roar of the crowd. For the first time, the man who came to dominate the stage was silenced by the people themselves. JD's smirk vanished. His eyes darted, his jaw clenched, his power slipping through his fingers in real time. He had expected silence, maybe anger, but not this, not an uprising. Jasmine stood still, her eyes glistening, letting the chant wash over her. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. She had simply asked, and the people had answered. The moderator tried to regain control, his voice drowned in the roar. Producers in the back scrambled, realizing this was no longer their broadcast. This was a movement being born live on air. Jasmine finally raised her hand, and the crowd fell into a heavy hush. Her eyes locked with the camera, with the millions watching. Her voice cut through the storm like a blade. "You heard them. I won't sit down. Because standing up isn't just defiance, it's survival." She paused, her stare unflinching, the silence now hers alone. And then she asked the question that would haunt the night. But what happens when standing up isn't just defiance, but a direct challenge to power itself? The chant shook the hall like thunder. "Stand up, Jasmine! Stand up, Jasmine!" It rolled through the crowd in waves, louder, faster, unstoppable. The stage lights trembled as if the building itself was alive. Cameras zoomed wide, then split into panels. On one side, Jasmine stood calm, her eyes burning in the storm of voices. On the other, Americans across the country watched in real time, their own reactions spilling into history. In a small diner in Ohio, truckers slammed their coffee mugs down, rising from their seats, chanting at the screen. In a veterans hall in Texas, men and women in uniform stood together, tears glinting under neon lights. In living rooms across the nation, families leaned forward, shouting at their TVs as though their voices could join the crowd. Social media exploded like gasoline on fire. Hashtags surged through timelines at breakneck speed. "Stand up, Jasmine. Unfit for who? She speaks for us." Within minutes, her name trended worldwide. Memes were born. Clips looped, the chant echoing across millions of devices. News anchors whispered in hushed tones as their earpieces buzzed. One on CNN muttered, "This isn't just a debate. This is war." Over at Fox, commentators scrambled to spin it, voices cracking as they tried to frame the moment as chaos. But the images were undeniable, a woman standing tall and a crowd rising with her. JD Vance sat frozen, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. For once, he wasn't in command. Every camera angle betrayed it. His smirk was gone, his eyes darting, his posture shrinking under the roar. The insult that was supposed to silence her had turned into an anthem. Jasmine didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply stood there, steady as a mountain, letting the chant lift higher and higher. The more the people roared, the smaller JD seemed to become. And somewhere deep in the silence of their own homes, Americans realized what they were watching wasn't just a broadcast, it was a spark. The kind of spark that spreads beyond walls, beyond screens, into something far larger. The anchors were right. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was the opening shot of a political war. The chant was still echoing when JD slammed his fist against the desk. His voice cut through the roar, sharp, desperate. "This is what's wrong with America. Mobs replacing truth." His words cracked like gunfire, a last attempt to seize control. The room stilled, but not with respect, with shock. Cameras zoomed in on his face, the veins tight in his neck, the anger spilling through every gesture. He wasn't calm anymore. He was cornered. Within minutes, the spin machine roared to life. Fox News hosts went live, faces flushed, framing Jasmine as reckless and unstable. She's angry. She's dangerous. This is mob rule dressed up as democracy, one anchor declared, her voice trembling with forced certainty. Across the split screen, MSNBC pushed back with fire. Clips replayed Jasmine's silence, her steady gaze, the crowd's eruption. Commentators called it a turning point, a moment of truth. They framed JD as rattled, out of touch, clinging to power that no longer belonged to him. Op-eds poured in before the night was over. One paper praised Jasmine as the voice of the voiceless. Another accused her of fueling chaos. The nation's media battlefield lit up like a war zone, each outlet firing headlines like bullets. The tension seeped into living rooms. Families argued at dinner tables, fathers calling it disrespect, daughters calling it courage. Veterans debated in smoky halls, some siding with JD's order, others moved by Jasmine's defiance. America was split, but no one could look away. Back in the control rooms, producers whispered to anchors, "The numbers are spiking. People can't stop watching." Clips of JD's outburst looped online, but side by side with Jasmine's silence, his fury looked weak. The more he shouted, the more powerful her quiet became. JD leaned into the storm, doubling down on every network that would host him. He warned of mobs of disorder, of America collapsing under emotional politicians. His face was red, his tone sharp, but every word carried the same fear that Jasmine had struck something deeper than politics. The establishment felt it too. Power was trembling. Her strength wasn't just defiance anymore. It was a threat. The next morning, the press room overflowed. Cameras lined the back wall, microphones jammed the podium, reporters shouting for a quote. Everyone expected Jasmine to defend herself, to hit back at JD with the same venom. She didn't. She stepped up to the podium, steady as stone, her blazer sharp, her eyes alive with fire. When the room hushed, she began, not with anger, but with stories. She spoke of a veteran who fought for his country and came home to find his benefits slashed, told he was unfit to serve in civilian life. She spoke of a single mother who worked double shifts, only to be told she wasn't fit to raise her child without help. She spoke of immigrants who cleaned streets and built homes, but were silenced as unfit to call America theirs. Her voice cut through the room like a hymn and a hammer at the same time. Every story was a mirror reflecting the insult back onto a system that had failed too many. What JD had hurled at her now belonged to every American who had ever been told to sit down and shut up. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously, lenses zooming closer. The silence in the hall wasn't weakness anymore. It was listening. And with every word, Jasmine turned a personal attack into a national indictment. "This isn't about me," she said, her hand pressed against the podium. "This is about every American who's been told they don't belong, who's been told they're unfit because of where they come from, how much money they have, or the color of their skin." The words rippled outward. In homes across the country, people nodded. Veterans wiped their eyes. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Immigrants whispered to themselves, "She's talking about us." By the time she finished, the room was silent again, but not with shock, with reverence. She didn't need JD's insult to vanish. She had transformed it into a weapon, a banner, a cause. Her eyes locked on the cameras, on the millions watching. Her voice dropped to a question that hung like a challenge in every living room across America. But in America, when you raise your voice, who listens and who tries to shut you down? The eruption inside that hall was only the spark. The real battlefield was waiting in the media, where every frame could twist the truth or set it free. By nightfall, the media war had begun. On Fox News, a panel of stern faces nodded in unison. J.D. Vance was hailed as a man of order, a voice strong enough to stop what they called chaos on stage. The host leaned in voices sharp, warning that Jasmine represented the mob rule eating away at America. They replayed her silence, twisting it as weakness, painting her as an angry woman who refused to respect authority. Their words carried steel, but their eyes betrayed unease. On MSNBC, the tone was the opposite: fire, admiration, awe. Commentators dissected the silence Jasmine held after the insult, calling it a masterstroke of composure. They argued she turned humiliation into strength, flipping a dismissal into a rallying cry for millions. Clips rolled again and again, JD shouting, "Jasmine," still the crowd erupting. Each time the contrast sharpened. He looked unhinged. She looked unbreakable. The footage became a split-screen parable, a morality play America couldn't stop watching. But outside the studios, the spin landed in homes like shrapnel. In one living room, a father slammed his fist on the table, snarling that Jasmine was dangerous. Across from him, his daughter pushed back, tears in her eyes, shouting that Jasmine was the first politician who had ever sounded like her. In diners, arguments spilled over coffee mugs. Old veterans muttered that order mattered more than noise. Younger workers shook their heads, insisting it wasn't noise. It was truth finally spoken aloud. Even churches buzzed, congregations split between respecting power and speaking justice. Social media turned into a battlefield of its own. Hashtags divided timelines like trenches. Stand with JD rose on one side, Stand Up Jasmine surged on the other. Families scrolled at the same table but lived in different Americas, their feeds feeding different truths. Reporters called it the most polarizing 24 hours since an election night. Yet deep down, the fear was clear. Jasmine's calm had cut through in a way no shouting could match. Her silence was being replayed not as surrender, but as defiance. America was no longer just watching a debate, it was choosing sides in a cultural war. The next debate night felt heavier, as if the whole country was waiting for the rematch. Cameras snapped on, lights blazed hot, and the air carried that same electric hum. J.D. Vance leaned forward, ready to reassert control, but Jasmine came prepared. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lifted a folder, neat, sharp, deliberate. Pages of hard numbers, poverty rates, job losses, eviction data, all from Ohio, J.D.'s home state. Her words landed like hammer strikes. 1 in 6 children in Ohio lives in poverty. Thousands of veterans are denied care. Families are working full-time and still going hungry. She paused, letting the numbers burn into the air. J.D. shifted uncomfortably. His smirk flickered, his fingers tightening against the table. The cameras zoomed in, splitting the screen. Jasmine, steady and calm. J.D., restless eyes darting. Then she turned to him, locking eyes, her voice sharpened, each syllable clear. "So tell us, Senator, who's unfit to lead the woman fighting for people, or the man ignoring them?" The hall went dead silent. For 3 long seconds, no one breathed. Then gasps broke out, sharp and raw, rolling across the room like aftershocks. J.D. tried to respond, but his voice cracked. That's misleading," he stammered, his face flushing red. He waved his hands, trying to swat the numbers away like flies, but every gesture made him smaller. The audience leaned forward, eyes glued to the stage. The veteran's jaw dropped. The single mother clasped her hands, whispering, "Yes." Even the factory workers rose slightly from their seats, fists tightening, hearts pounding. The cameras captured it all. On one side, controlled dignity, calm, unshakable. On the other, raw anger, unraveling live power, slipping through his grip. It was no longer just about policy, it was about character. JD's voice grew louder, desperate, his words tumbling into rage. But the more he shouted, the clearer the contrast became. Jasmine didn't need to raise her tone. Her truth had already landed. The debate wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. And America had just seen who truly looked unfit. The numbers had shaken JD, but his team wasn't done. Within days, whispers began to crawl through headlines and social media feeds. Anonymous leaks claimed Jasmine had exaggerated her education, that her law degree was inflated, that she wasn't who she said she was. Fox hosts pounced, their voices dripping with doubt. "Who is Jasmine Crockett really?" one anchor asked with a knowing smile. Op-eds followed, questioning her past, her credentials, her very right to stand on that stage. The tactic was old but effective. Plant a seed of doubt, let it spread. and soon truth feels smaller than suspicion. By the end of the week, hashtags like fake Jasmine began trending, pushed by coordinated accounts. But Jasmine refused to fold. She called a press conference not defensive, not cornered, calm, composed. Her team rolled out a live feed streaming to every platform at once. The room fell quiet when she stepped up to the podium. She didn't speak first. Instead, she introduced a man with white hair and a steady voice, her former law professor from Yale. He leaned into the microphone and said plainly, "I taught Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't just capable, she was brilliant. She was the student who asked the questions no one else dared to ask." The room shifted. Reporters scribbled harder, cameras zoomed closer. The lie that had hung in the air all week began to crack. Jasmine then took the mic. Her voice was low but fierce. "This is how power works. They can't beat your ideas, so they attack your story. But my story is mine, and it belongs to every person who's been told they don't belong." Applause broke out. Not loud at first, but steady building, like a drum line in the back of the hall. Even online comments poured in, veterans, mothers, students, all saying the same thing. "We know the truth." JD's whisper campaign had backfired. The attempt to silence her only made her stronger, her image sharper. But even as she stood tall, a question lingered, like smoke over the crowd. But when the truth cuts deeper than lies, will it cost her everything? The chamber was packed, every seat taken, every camera red with record lights. The banner behind the dais read, "Hearing on Fitness for Office." It wasn't just policy anymore. It was a stage, and America was watching. Jasmine sat at the witness table, posture, steady, papers neatly stacked in front of her. The microphones picked up her breathing, the stillness in her presence. She looked calm, but her eyes were sharp, cutting through the tension like glass. J.D. Vance sat above on the committee, arms crossed, smug smile plastered across his face. He leaned into his mic, voice dripping with contempt. "Sit down, you're unfit." The words echoed across the chamber. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. Cameras whipped toward Jasmine, hunting for cracks, waiting to see if she would bend. But she didn't move. Instead, she reached slowly into her folder and pulled out a single chart. The room seemed to inhale as she held it high, bold red lines showing inequality spiking under JD's policies in Ohio. Poverty rising, families falling behind, veterans cut from the programs they were promised. She laid the chart flat on the table, tapping it once with her finger. Then her voice cut through the silence. "You call me unfit. These are your numbers, Senator. This is your record. This is what unfit looks like." The chamber froze. Flashes popped like lightning, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. On split screen, the contrast was brutal. JD's sneer hardening into panic, Jasmine unflinching, her calm more powerful than his fury. JD tried to respond, but his words stumbled. "That's cherry-picked," he muttered, his face tightening, his confidence cracking. He reached for his notes, flipping pages with shaking hands, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Jasmine didn't press further. She didn't need to. She leaned back, hands folded, letting the weight of the truth fill the air. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was victory. For a moment, the hearing was no longer about her. It was about him, his record, his failure, his arrogance now exposed under the brightest lights. And the nation watching at home felt the shift. For the first time, J.D. Vance wasn't the one in control. He was the one on trial. The chamber was still buzzing from the chart Jasmine dropped on the table. J.D. Vance shifted in his seat, red creeping across his face, while cameras clicked like rapid fire. The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was judgment hanging heavy in the air. Then unexpectedly, a voice broke through. One of the Republican lawmakers leaned into his microphone. He didn't praise her outright, but his words carried weight. "The numbers speak for themselves," he said carefully, his eyes glancing toward Jasmine with a hint of respect. Across the dais, another lawmaker cleared her throat. This time it wasn't hedged or subtle. "She's asking questions that deserve answers," she said firmly. A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters' pens scratched faster, sensing history unfolding in real time. And then it happened. From the witness row, a veteran with gray hair and a stiff back pushed himself to his feet. He wore a faded uniform jacket, medal still pinned to the chest. His voice rang clear. "She speaks for us." Gasps swept the chamber. J.D. froze, glaring, his authority cracking. The veteran stood tall, refusing to sit down. His words weren't a plea, they were a verdict. The moment hit like a thunderclap. More voices rose from the gallery, small at first, then stronger. She's right. Listen to her. The chant didn't form, but the energy surged, undeniable, rising from every corner of the room. For a heartbeat, it no longer felt like a hearing. It felt like a trial, not of Jasmine, but of America's conscience. The question hanging in the air wasn't about her fitness. It was about the nation's soul. Cameras caught everything, JD shrinking deeper into his chair, lawmakers exchanging uneasy glances, Jasmine sitting calm, her presence steady as a lighthouse in a storm. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. Others were now standing for her. And as the flashes erupted, the story was already being written, not just in headlines, but in the hearts of those watching. This wasn't one woman against one man anymore. It was people rising against silence. JD's face burned crimson as murmurs filled the chamber. The veteran's words still echoed in the air, hanging heavier than anything he had said. He shoved his chair back, the screech of metal loud enough to make heads turn. Then he stood abruptly, trying to leave, but the press smelled blood. Reporters swarmed like a tide, microphones thrust forward, voices colliding. "Senator, are you afraid to answer her? Do you deny your own record?" Cameras followed every step, his retreat captured from every angle. He pushed past aides, but the questions only grew sharper. His hands shot up to shield his face, a move that only made him look smaller. In seconds, the man who once held the room in a smirk was cornered, drowning in flashbulbs. Inside the chamber, Jasmine remained seated, calm, unmoved. She didn't chase. She didn't gloat. She turned back to the people who had come to speak, and one by one they began to rise. A single mother stepped to the microphone, her voice shaking but firm. She told of working double shifts and still being told she was unfit to raise her kids. A factory worker followed, speaking of layoffs, his hands rough with grease, his pride worn thin. An immigrant father whispered through broken English about being silenced for years. Jasmine listened to every word. She nodded her gaze, steady her pen, scribbling notes, as if each story mattered more than politics itself. The cameras caught it all, not a politician posturing, but a woman listening, absorbing, caring. The energy shifted. It was no longer about a clash between her and JD. It was about a chorus of unheard voices finally filling the silence. And Jasmine, by choosing not to fight for herself, had become the vessel for them all. In the hallway, JD's retreat looked frantic, desperate, a man running from his own shadow. But inside, Jasmine sat rooted, calm, as a rock in the storm, surrounded by the very people power had tried to erase. The contrast was brutal, undeniable. One stormed out, the other stayed. And in that difference, America saw who truly carried strength. But a question lingered, sharp and haunting. If silence was once a weapon, can it now become a revolution? What began as a single chant inside a congressional chamber spilled into the streets like wildfire. The hashtag Stand Up Jasmine no longer lived only on screens. It became paint on cardboard, ink on posters, spray across city walls from Ohio to New York. What was once a slogan online had turned into a banner for the streets. Rallies swelled overnight. In Chicago, elderly women marched arm in arm, their canes tapping the pavement like a marching band. In Dallas, veterans lifted American flags, medals, catching the sunlight, their voices hoarse but unyielding. On college campuses, students filled the lawns with chants that rolled like thunder. "We are Jasmine." The movement found rhythm. Local artists painted murals of Jasmine's face, bold and unshaken. Musicians wrote songs with her words woven into choruses, echoing from subway tunnels to festival stages. Gospel choirs turned her silence into harmony, drawing thousands who sang in unison, their voices rising like a second anthem. It wasn't just noise. It was energy pulsing through diners, where families debated in buses, crowded with workers in church basements, where communities planned their next march. America hadn't felt this alive in years. The air itself seemed to carry a charge, as if every small town and city block breathed the same fire. And the signs everywhere, the signs. Some handmade with markers on poster board, some printed and polished, some carved into wood by rough, calloused hands. They all carried the same words, "Stand Up." But more powerful still were the ones painted with bold strokes, "We are Jasmine." JD's insult had meant to shrink her. Instead, it crowned her as a symbol of defiance. Every dismissal of women, every silencing of minorities, Every time the powerless had been told to sit down, all of it converged in her image. Jasmine didn't chase it. She didn't claim the title. She didn't need to. The people carried it for her. And as the chants grew louder, as streets filled with voices once ignored, the truth was undeniable. This was no longer about one congresswoman. It was about a country finding the courage to stand again. The stage was set for the final showdown. Bright lights burned, hot cameras pointed from every angle, and millions tuned in, knowing this night would decide more than just reputations. It felt less like a debate and more like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Jasmine stepped onto the stage, calm her face, steady her presence, commanding. Across from her, J.D. Vance leaned forward, his smirk returning like a mask. He wanted this to be his redemption, one last chance to break her. For a while the questions rolled. Policy, economics, foreign affairs. But everyone knew the sparks were coming. And when they did, it was J.D. who struck first. He raised his voice, pointing at her with sharp fingers. "You're unfit, Jasmine. Always have been. Always will be." His words cracked like a whip, sharp enough to make some in the audience flinch. The room tensed. Cameras zoomed. Commentators whispered into their microphones, waiting for her reaction. Would she fight fire with fire? Would she crumble? She didn't. Jasmine stood tall, letting the insult hang in the air. Then with deliberate calm, she reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her voice was clear, steady, unshaken. She began to read, word for word. The United States Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. The hall fell silent, the power of the words flooding the space. J.D. shifted in his chair, trying to interject, but his voice was drowned by the rising hush of the crowd, leaning forward. Jasmine's voice grew stronger as she finished. Who? Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in unity. They rose to their feet, the thunder of applause drowning J.D. completely. His words vanished under the roar raised by the sound of America standing. It wasn't about parties anymore. It wasn't about who sat left or right. It was about principle, and the people had chosen their side. That night, the Constitution didn't belong to J.D.'s podium. It belonged to Jasmine. And through her, it belonged once again to the people. The roar had not faded when Jasmine leaned forward once more. She didn't need to raise her arms, didn't need to demand silence. The crowd quieted on its own, drawn in by the gravity of her presence. Her voice came low, steady, every word cutting through the hall like a drumbeat. We rise when one of us is told to sit down. The words hung heavy, echoing into the rafters. We rise because justice cannot kneel. Not now, not ever. Each phrase rolled like thunder, shaking the chamber and every living room watching live. The cameras swept wide, capturing the power of the moment. Veterans in worn uniforms stood tall, their hands trembling as they saluted. Mothers clutched their children, close tears streaming, whispering promises of a better tomorrow. Students, workers, elders from the back rows to the front, every seat emptied as America rose to its feet. J.D. sat still, his chair seeming too big for him now. The smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had lost more than an argument. He had lost the crowd. He had lost the room. And in that moment, he looked smaller than he had ever been. Jasmine did not gloat. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the crowd, then locked on the camera lens as if speaking directly into the heart of every home. "This was never about me," she said softly. "It's about us. About a country that refuses to bow when dignity is under attack." The final shot unfolded like a scene carved into history. Black, white, Latino, Asian. Young and old, rich and poor, every face lifted, every body standing united in one simple act. Applause rolled like waves, unstoppable, crashing again and again. Jasmine's eyes stayed on the lens, her voice slowing to a whisper that carried louder than any shout. If standing up is an act of defiance, then maybe it's also the beginning of America standing tall again. Will you stand? And as the words faded, millions at home felt the weight. Some nodded, some wiped tears, and many, without even realizing it, stood up too. When Jasmine refused to sit down, she showed that silence can be turned into strength and insults into unity. Her courage reminded us that justice is not defended by speeches alone, but by ordinary people who choose to rise when others are pushed down. And now the question lingers for each of us. When the moment comes, will we remain seated? Or will we rise? If Jasmine's stand moved, you don't just watch in silence. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where standing up is not defiance but dignity. Tap the bell because the next story may not only expose power, it may remind us of our own. What part of Jasmine's courage stayed with you? Leave a comment. Let's rise together, not just watch alone. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.